remember the first time I realized BDSM wasn't just about what happens in the bedroom. I was completely blissed out after a scene, and I thought, why does this feel so good? Well, it turns out there's actual psychology behind it. Whether you're brand new to kink or you're just curious why your brain craves it, I'm breaking it all down today. I'm Alessandra from Dom-Sub-Living, and let's talk about psychology and kink. Welcome to the Dom-Sub-Living podcast. When we're talking about psychology and this lifestyle, it's not just about people with trauma or people who like pain. That's a huge misconception. But by the end of this episode, you'll understand why BDSM excites you, why it feels so good, and how your brain plays a huge role in what turns you on. So let's talk about the science of pleasure and pain, and first of all, how your brain processes pain, pleasure, and arousal. So how does BDSM trigger endorphins and dopamine? Well, I'll give you an example. So I recently started doing hot yoga, and it's not just hot yoga, it is like sauna yoga. Like it is so hot. There's steam in the room. When I come out, my hair is soaked, my clothes are soaked, and it is just extremely hard. I'm holding poses for, over a minute and my muscles are just shaking. I come home and I'm so sore, and when I'm done with a class, I will text my dom and say, I think I just died. That was the hardest thing I've ever done. It was so hard. My muscles are so weak. I'm so spent and I'm so sore. But afterwards, I feel great and I feel amazing and I just feel so relaxed. So it's not unheard of to do something really extreme, really painful, and get pleasure from it. So, have you ever had like a really good run or a workout where your muscles just really hurt, but you felt amazing afterwards? Well, that's endorphins kicking in, and BDSM does the same thing. So, some examples in BDSM is just things like impact play, spanking, or even hair pulling. Those all release endorphins and create a natural high. I remember after one particular intense scene, I was just laying there kind of floating, wondering what had just happened. I couldn't even talk really. And I just realized this wasn't just about physical intimacy. This was about my brain on endorphins. And it's not just endorphins and dopamine from physical feelings. Even just anticipating an act can have that effect. But why? Why does anticipation feel so good? Well, have you ever been teased to the point where you're almost begging for release? Well, that's dopamine at work. So, some examples are things like edging or orgasm denial, even just waiting for a punishment, or even for the dominant giving the punishment can be a form of anticipating. They know it's coming. And so, all those things really activate the brain's reward system because dopamine rewards anticipation. It's why teasing or waiting or even hearing that sound of the flogger before it lands can just feel so intense. So, have you ever felt that weird mix of fear and excitement right before something intense happens? It's like your brain kind of just lighting up and firing up and giving you all those signals. But what if I told you that your brain doesn't know the difference between good pain and bad pain? It's all about having that context, and that's why BDSM needs to be consensual. But now let's talk about the role of trust and surrender, because we talked about physical pain and pleasure and anticipation, but why do we crave power exchange and vulnerability in BDSM? Like, what's that about? Well, speaking for myself, submission just really feels safe. So even when it's intense, so that can sound kind of weird, but people assume that submission is about being weak, but actually it takes a huge amount of trust. So a lot of times you'll hear submissive say something like, I've never felt safer than when I was tied up. So why is that? Well, it's because you're in this vulnerable state. You have compression against your body, and you're with hopefully someone that you trust. And just being able to let go like that and being in a situation like that willingly just makes your body and your mind feel so at ease and just feel so safe. And there was a moment in my own dynamic where I just realized that BDSM made me feel safer than any vanilla relationship I had ever been in. I remember this time very vividly where I was just completely spread eagle, tied up. I had a blindfold on, I had a gag in my mouth, and I was just completely vulnerable. But the level of communication we had beforehand, the checking in we had during, the fact that I had limits and safe words in place, it was just unlike anything else I had experienced. So, have you ever wanted to completely let go and not have to think, well, that's kind of the allure of being a sub too, that you just get to let go and kind of turn off your brain for a minute and let your partner take over. And DOMs can experience this vulnerability too. There's actually a lot of psychology around dominance and the thrill of control. Because while subs say BDSM makes them feel safe, there's the flip side where dominants often say it makes them feel grounded, focused, and connected and in control of both their lives, themselves, and their partner and their dynamic. Because there is a huge responsibility in controlling someone else's pleasure or pain or even their whole life if you're doing 24/7 total power exchange. So it just really creates that deep emotional fulfillment. And it's not about just doing whatever you want as a Dom. It's really about reading someone's body language and checking in and providing structure for them so they have this framework and this safe place to really just let go and be their true selves. And I know my Dom says that, there's so much to feel out of control with, in terms of maybe his job or, just economic things, health things, the state of the world. There's just so much to feel out of control with. And so having a dynamic like this just gives him such a huge sense of control, and that just really makes him feel so much better and just so much safer and just increases his well-being. But isn't it ironic that true control in BDSM comes from trust, not force? The more we try to force anything in life, including relationships, our work, and things like that, it seems like the less control we have. So really, just trusting in, you know, himself as a Dom and really trusting our dynamic and trusting me as his sub, trusting me to speak up and use my safe words, all of that has just brought my Dom more control. And BDSM has really helped him to discover that. So the more he's able to just let go and we kind of just do this dance, and that way it's not forced, it just really brings that control to our lives naturally. So we talked about the science of pleasure and pain and the role of trust in surrender and control. But now let's talk about the psychology of taboos and forbidden desires. So the good stuff. So why do forbidden things turn us on so much? Well, the brain is really fascinated with what we shouldn't do. And I kind of have an embarrassing story to tell. When I was I think it was about 7 years old. So my sister, who was 8 years older than me, she was having a sleepover at our house for her birthday and having friends over. And they were going to be watching the movie Dirty Dancing. And I said this was going to be embarrassing. So they were going to be staying up late and watching this movie. And my mom told me that this was for, older teenagers and that I couldn't watch it. And so she told me that when they were going to watch it, that I had to stay in my room. So of course, what was I gonna do? I was going to sneak out when they were watching it. I was going to, pretend like, oh, I was just getting a drink of water, and I would peek around the corner and watch this forbidden movie that my older sister was watching. Now, if my mom had just said, oh, they're gonna be watching a movie, if you want to watch too, that's fine. I probably would have done the opposite and be like, ew, why do I want to hang out with my sister? I'm just going to play Barbies in my room. But the fact that I was told I couldn't come out of my room and that I couldn't watch this movie because it was for older kids, that just made it more alluring. And so I, to this day, have this secret love for the movie Dirty Dancing, because I always remember being that little girl and sneaking to watch how risque this movie was. But the point is, from childhood, we're told what's wrong and what's right, but our brains don't work that way. Because if you tell someone they can't have something, then suddenly that's all they can think about. So that's why things like degradation, humiliation, role play, those things are just so appealing to so many people because it goes against social norms. Even just the whole dom sub dynamic, being able to tell someone what to do, being in this controlling relationship, that is just so taboo from our society. We're kind of fed these Disney romantic movies where it just seems so innocent and relationships are just so vanilla, and the couples just live happily ever after. And then you have something like the movie Dirty Dancing, which is completely different than all of the other past romantic Disney movies I had watched. So having these different naughty fantasies that we never really got to act out in real life can just feel so appealing. So kink really just gives you a space to play with things that are taboo, to be able to play with them in a safe way and without actually doing it so much in real life. It's kind of like watching horror movies even. When you're watching those things, you're being entertained by them, but that doesn't mean you really want to be chased by an actual axe murderer like that, but you're watching it from a safe distance. And so it's thrilling and it's entertaining. So it kind of actually makes you wonder, if society never shamed all these kinky bedroom activities, would we still crave it? Would I still have a business like Dom Sub Living? Because if it isn't taboo anymore, would people still want to do these things? So kind of makes you think. But there's a whole other reason why we psychologically enjoy kink, and that's because things like BDSM give us this catharsis or emotional release. And in particular, kink can help you process emotions and trauma. And a lot of times you'll hear people say in the kink community, they'll say, BDSM is my therapy. And then sometimes you hear people on the other side say, well, you still need actual therapy. You can't use BDSM as your therapy. And I just want to say, I'm not a therapist, but I do believe that people should do what works for them. Usually when we're talking about therapy, we're talking about Western therapy that is rooted in a lot of misogyny, a lot of racism, a lot of capitalism even too, because therapy, is for profit. So I never want to tell someone that, they can't use BDSM as therapy, or that they should have to still go to therapy. I am a big proponent of therapy if it works for you and you want to do it. Me and my dom have gone to therapy, but the truth of the matter is that there is a good reason why BDSM can be like therapy for some people, and I would never want to discourage that. So you may have heard people give experiences like, crying after a scene, and I've totally been there. I've bawled my eyes out after a scene and just been able to let go of a lot of emotional baggage, and sometimes, a lot of times, even more so than I would in a therapy sessions. Um, Other people can feel completely weightless during a scene, and that's because BDSM can just, again, let you let go of those emotions in even a physical way and to really process them. And it's not just for submissives either. Doms can get in the flow when they're doing a scene. Even something like flogging can really just get them in that emotional flow where when you're doing something routine and with your body, it can just be a way to release a lot of pent up stress. But I've had moments where a scene just felt like I had let go of something I didn't even know I was holding on to, and something repressed and had been there for a while, and just finally been able to let go of it. So I would never discourage that from someone. Because even in regards to deeper things like actual trauma, actual bad things that may have happened to you as a child or even later in life, role playing and reframing these experiences in a safe container like BDSM can be really useful. Some people use BDSM and kink to take control of past fears. So, not actually reliving them, but it's kind of like rewriting the script in a safe and consensual way. Not going into a lot of detail because I don't want this episode to be flagged more than it probably is. But again, childhood traumas, abuse, forced intimacy. So, experiencing those actions and feelings in a container like a scene can help you get back your power. You have the power to make it stop, to use your safe word and say no, or even experiencing scenes like consensual non-consent, where you can emotionally put yourself in a similar situation where maybe you're not saying no, but you have that trust with your partner, can just be so beneficial. There's also age play like daddy dom little girl dynamics that can help you process these things, and it's kinda one of those things, like, it doesn't make sense unless you've actually gone through it. So someone outside of this lifestyle, they may hear these things and they probably will stumble upon it and comment, but they, say, "How can that help you? Like, there must be something messed up with you in the head to want to experience something from, a traumatic experience." But there there is studies behind this about how beneficial it can be, because kink is less about damage and things like that, but it's more about healing. It can be kind of like exposure therapy, if you've ever heard of that. In fact, there's the story, you've probably heard about this guy, Aaron Ralston, I think is how you pronounce it, but he was the guy who was hiking in Utah and, fell down a cliff and pinned his arm and was there for like over 5 days, didn't have anything to eat or drink, and actually had to cut off his arm and had to hike back and get rescued. But what I thought was so interesting about this man and this experience is that he later went back to the place where he was hiking. And when they made a movie out of this, it was the movie 127 Hours, that he was actually a consultant for this movie and talked about his experiences. So, going through this, going back to the place where it all happened, was a way for him to finally process it and let go and take this horrible traumatic experience that, physically damaged him, physically left, permanent reminders of what had happened, that he was able then to process it in a healthy way and overcome it. So, exposure therapy, in something like a container like a BDSM scene can again, help you to process these horrific events that may have happened. Because a lot of times we can't be like him and physically revisit the places or the traumas that happened to us, or go back to that age we were when these things happened. And no movie studio is going to make a movie about our personal experiences usually. So instead, we can use something like kink to help us process these emotions and these traumas. But I just want to say that obviously, not everyone who enjoys kink or BDSM has emotional issues or trauma, but some of us do. Even a lot of us do. And so we can use BDSM as a tool to help us cope and heal. But hopefully you can see now, BDSM turns you on not just because of pleasure, but because of psychology, because of trust, surrender, control, taboos, and even healing. But now I want to hear from you. So what part of BDSM excites you the most? Is it the anticipation, the power exchange, the emotional release? Let me know in the comments and share your story and experiences. I read every comment. And make sure to subscribe so we can keep having these important discussions together. And until next time, keep embracing your power and pleasure through Dom Sub Living.